True story. Navy Captain Michael D. Abershoff, when he took over the command of the USS Benfold, morale on that ship was the lowest of all ships in the U.S. Navy. 18 months later, under his command, morale retested was the highest of all ships in the U.S. Navy. He
Wow.
literally took morale from worst to first. How did he do that?
Hello, and welcome to The Storyteller's Mission with Zena Del Lowe, a podcast for artists and storytellers about changing the world for the better through story. So today I have a special guest on the episode with us. His name is Bob Tiede, and we've been in touch for a long time. We've had this nice little relationship going on, and he's actually sent me some of his books that are going to be available for you today for free, some of them. So it's a very exciting day, and I just want to introduce Bob Tiede. Bob, please welcome and tell us a little
Zena.
bit about yourself.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm honored to be here. Zena, I guess in introducing myself, I always share that I start with a confession. For most of my career, I was a benevolent dictator. And, my blog now is leading with questions. But the story, and I love your podcast. I love the theme of stories. And so kind of my story is, yeah, for most of my career, I was a benevolent dictator. My only paradigm of leadership was that I thought the job of a leader was to tell staff what to do. But I did say benevolent dictator. Zena, if I grew up in a home where I was taught to say please and thank you. So if you'd been on my team, I don't think I ever would have said, Zena, go do this. It'd been more like, hey, Zena, here's what we're working on. It'd really be great if you could please do this. But it was still telling. And when you did it, I would have said thank you. But in 2006, I found a new book. I love books. And I found a new book. I actually happen to have the book I bought, the first edition of Leading with Questions by Dr. Michael Morquart. You can see I devoured it. But as I read this book, filled with stories of leaders literally from around the globe who were leading with questions, and the questions they were using, my only question was, why hasn't anyone ever shared this concept of leadership with me before? I immediately embraced it. And, today I would say that a leader who leads with questions can be up to 10 times more effective than a leader who simply leads by telling. But that all started when I found that book. Fast forward again in big pieces. It was in 2012 that I started a blog called Leading with Questions. And today the blog, we just celebrated the 12th anniversary, is followed by leaders in over 200 nations, which blows me away. I don't know leaders in 200 nations, but they found me. And I'm having the time of my life. My
And it's an
mission.
interesting thing because what you're talking about, we're not talking really about storytelling per se today. What we're talking about is the idea that we are leaders in culture, in society, wherever we're placed, and that as leaders, there is a better way to engage with people that actually builds relationship, that helps inspire people, that gives you a position to be able to change lives, which most of
Yes.
us say that we want to do. And it just makes us more effective in terms of both accomplishing our own vision, but also then finding people to come alongside of us and help us to accomplish those things. Would that be an accurate assessment?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Zena, a question for you. How have you felt whenever you've had a leader, someone you reported to, say, Zena, what do you think we ought to do here? How did that make you feel?
Panicked. No,
Okay.
I better give the right answer. No, of course, it makes you feel respected. It makes you feel valuable. It makes you
Yeah.
feel like you matter and that you are smart and that your opinions have weight, and that feels good. And then it makes you feel like you would go to the ends of the earth to support someone who saw you that way.
Yeah. You've said it so well. You've said it so well. Without that leader saying, Zena, I value you, I think you have much to contribute, just the action of asking and then listening for your input communicated that. And I always say to leaders, if that's how you have felt when you've had leaders that you reported to ask you, how will your staff feel when you ask them? And it's
Right.
like the light bulb, the same.
Well, it's interesting because one thing that you should know in one of the books that you sent me, and by the way, for those of you that are at home, most of the books I have here a stack of little books, and all were sent to me as a gift by Bob. Now, this is the only one apparently that you would have to purchase, but these other ones he has put into an ebook form, and he has generously, if you look in the notes section, there are links to be able to download any of these as ebooks, which I just think is so incredibly generous. There's 5 of them. But one of the ones that I read through and that has actually impacted me quite a bit and actually kind of changed even some of my coaching style, believe it or not, was this one. Wait, was it this one or this one? I think it was this one. Now, that's a great question. And I went through this and I started underlying things. And I'm like, you know what? This is helpful with my coaching. This helps me to be a better coach, a better writing coach for my clients. So it's been very helpful. And let me ask you some questions about
Okay.
these questions, right? First of all, this comes from years of experience in the workplace, like an actual, most of us artists aren't in these sorts of corporate environments, but that's where you're kind of learning a lot of this stuff. So tell us about this journey, and then tell us about what sort of a turnaround or what some of the results were, and what some of the questions are that you began asking yourself, but then having your staff ask too, for, it just rolls downhill.
Oh, well, again, thank you. Thank you for that wonderful endorsement. I appreciate it. Again, as I continue my story, as I read this book, the first edition, I immediately embraced it. It was just like, this just makes sense. And one of the kind of stories that I tell, I use to illustrate is, I make the statement, a leader who leads with questions can be up to 10 times more effective. And people naturally ask, well, Bob, explain that. How can that be? And so, Zena, right now you're my audience. So I'm going to ask you a couple questions. Now, the first question is a silly question. It has an obvious answer, but I'm going somewhere. So just go with me.
Okay.
Imagine that you have a team of 9 staff. So you and 9 staff are your team.
Okay.
And all 10 of you are in a big rowboat. There's oars for every one of you. Everyone's got an oar in their hands. And as the leader of this group, you want to get that boat across the lake as quick as possible. How many of them do you want to have row with you?
All of them.
I told you it was a silly question. Of course, all of them. But now imagine that same team is gathered around your conference table. Now listen carefully. If you're a leader like I used to be, the benevolent dictator, and on that conference table, there's an opportunity. And you've just shared the opportunity. But if you're a leader like I used to be, and you think it's your job to figure out how to take advantage of the opportunity, and then you will tell them what to do, how many mental oars are in the water trying to figure out what to do?
Just
Only
yours.
one. Yeah, only one. Let's say you're a leader who leads with questions. So you share the opportunity, and then you look around that conference table and you say, hey, gang, what do you all think we might do here? Now, how many mental oars might be in the water?
Well, hopefully 10, yours
Yeah,
and the 9 staff.
exactly. Now, Zena, what's the probability as they begin to share their thoughts and ideas that you might hear an idea better than anything you were thinking?
Probably pretty good.
Yeah, not a guarantee, but again, the probability of hearing 9 other ideas in addition to yours. And so let's just say seated across the table from you, one of your staff, her name is Sarah, and Sarah shares an idea, and you're thinking to yourself, wow, that's so much better than what I was thinking. And so you lean forward and say, Sarah, love your idea. In fact, Sarah, would you lead our team in executing on your idea? How hard will Sarah work?
Really hard.
Whose idea is she executing?
Hers, yeah,
Hers.
yeah.
And then again, in that situation, that scenario, the team might build on Sarah's idea. Janet may say, and we could also add this, and Tom comes in, and suddenly the team has an idea and they now own it. And as a leader, you're sitting there thinking, wow, this has gone well. Wow, not only have we come up with better ideas, but now the team is so much more motivated than if I said, here's what I want you all to do. Especially if some of them are thinking, well, Zena pays our paycheck, so we better do what she wants, but I don't think that's a good idea. It doesn't have their whole heart then. So at any rate, that's one of the reasons that when I begin to see that scenario of, wow, yeah, asking, you're going to hear more ideas. And then when you,
and that's more just about also just being open, right?
yeah,
Like it's about being somebody that doesn't need to be in control, that doesn't need to have all the answers, that doesn't think that their way is the only way. It's about being open to the talent that you've surrounded yourself to. I could also see this, though, potentially being a manipulative tool if it's wielded poorly.
say more about that.
Well, like if you're asking questions, but you're trying to, I guess, you're using those questions to try to trap the other person or try to
Sure.
catch them or try to lead them. It's not a then it's not, you're not actually asking with an attitude of openness, you're asking with an attitude of directing and goading, and that could still feel manipulative.
Yeah, not all questions are the same.
There you go.
Zena, don't you think you ought to really go do this? That's a
Right.
question, but it's actually a hidden tell.
Right.
Zena, don't you think the only smart thing to do would be to do?
And then it becomes manipulative.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a whole nother scenario that could be manipulative, but it could be really good at the same time. I'm going to go down another path. There's two decision-making processes, and I'll call them decision-making process A and decision-making process B. They actually have the same three steps, but they're just put in a different order.
Mm-hmm.
In decision-making process A, leader makes a decision. Leaders shares with staff the decision. And third step, leader asks if there's any questions. In the second one, leader starts with saying, we're thinking about making some changes in this area. Any input that you all would have. Then leader makes decision. Then leader announces the decision. Well, what's the difference between the two? It's when does the leader ask? After the decision is made. Now, the decision that leader that makes decision-making process A makes a decision, shares with the staff, asks if they have any questions, and the leader thinks the questions will be about implementation. But instead, what usually happens is they say, well, did you think about? Have you considered? And now the leader's between a rock and a hard place. Like, no, we didn't. He's thinking inside or she's thinking inside. But I am the leader. And so are they going to cave and say, okay, we'll go rethink this? Or are they going to like, no, we've made the decision? Well, I always say you don't have to be between that rock and hard place, because the leader who used decision-making process B of saying, here's what we're thinking, we're going to make some changes in this area, but what should we be considering? They're hearing prior to making the decision all the stuff that in process A they only heard at the end. And then as they hear all of that, they actually will be able to make a better decision, because they've, oh yeah, we do need to consider. Hadn't thought about that. But yeah, that has to be addressed. Now, I said there's a good way and a bad way. Something really fascinating to me, Zena, is that when staff are asked to give input prior to the decision being made, the general rule is that most staff will actually support a final decision opposite of their input because they felt valued in being asked prior to the decision.
That's
And
interesting.
but at the same time, if a leader in a manipulative way said, I already know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to ask the staff anyhow so that I can get all that buy-in and good feeling, but I'm still going to do what I want to do. In other words, I'm going to ignore that, but I know that if I ask up front, I'll get better support. There'd be an example of, I think staff would see through that at some point, but kind of the same process could be used manipulative, or it can be used in a genuine way where you really benefit from their input.
And that's
And
really the key. And by the way,
yeah,
I kind of see this as even translating to different areas. I mean, you're using it in a corporate setting, but I think that this is a tool that really is helpful in terms of home life, like with families, you know, especially as kids get older. And if mothers and fathers were sitting down with their kids and saying, okay, here's something that's coming up, a big life change, a big something, and we want, here's what we're thinking, but we want to get your input. What do you think? And then the family discusses these things together and figures out, well,
yeah,
what are the pros, what are the cons? It's a way to sort of change the leadership even within the home. Not change the leadership, but the leadership dynamic.
yes. Leading with questions works everywhere.
It works everywhere.
It works everywhere. Another here's like I have a PowerPoint slide when I speak, and I say, which of these two statements is true? If you meet a new person and you do 80% of the talking, they most likely will leave that conversation not really trusting you. Or B, you meet a new person, you ask them questions, and they do 80% of the talking, and they most likely will leave that conversation trusting you.
Hmm.
I say,
Isn't that
which of those
interesting?
is true?
Yeah,
And
well,
the answer,
the second one. I mean,
the
they'll
answer is
trust you
actually
more
both.
when they do 80% of the
Yeah,
talking.
but the answer is both. Because the first
Oh,
question was, if you
sure,
do
sure.
80% of the talking, they'll mistrust you. And you can think so often, again, in any situation, wow, how could they trust me? They know very little. If I ask questions and they give all the answers, how could they trust me? But the fact is, we love to be listened to. And so when
Right.
somebody listens to us, we begin, again, it's not a conscious calculation, but at a feeling level, it's like, man, I trust Zena. She, yeah, she's a great conversationalist. And you're thinking, yeah, but you did all the talking. But it's an interesting dynamic.
You know what's
And
interesting about that is, so in Hollywood, and I'm sure this is true, by the way, this is true for all writers, all artists. We all have to go to these events where we're networking, where we're meeting new people.
yeah,
And one of the things, I get uncomfortable with that. I get uncomfortable because for one, I never want anyone to think that I'm like, if I'm going to a networking event where there's people in positions of power over me, I never want them to feel like I'm trying to schmooze them or it's gross, you know? And so I don't do that. I'm not very good at it. I don't want to do that. I don't like that. But there's also this part where you're supposed to just meet fellow artists, and sometimes that's awkward too. And one of the tactics I've used for years is that instead of it being about me, I just use it as an opportunity to get to know somebody else, and I start asking questions. And there, I don't ask the heavy questions like, so what's your biggest trauma?
yeah,
You know, that would be a really intrusive question. But I'll ask people, you know, hey, what do you write? What sorts of things are you interested in? What's your favorite show on television right now? Oh, what did you think of this one then? Oh, yeah, you know, and now all of a sudden we're having a conversation and we're building a relationship, and it's great.
absolutely. Zena, in that same situation, I mean, I meet, I'm sure you meet too, a lot of people who avoid those kind of situations because here's their thought. I don't know what to say.
Mm.
If I met so and so, I wouldn't know what to say to him or her. And so I'm not going to put myself in that situation. And the paradigm that I try to help people with is it's not about what you're going to say. It's like you, Zena, you've just shared there. You've got 3, 4 questions to start with. And so when you walk up to that new person and you start, it's not like, hey, here's what I'm going to have to say. Here's the speech I've prepared, so they'll be impressed with me. But rather, you start and say hi and ask that first question. And recently I came across, this was a new thought for me. I loved it. A lot of times we start with maybe the obvious question. Zena, where'd you grow up?
Right.
Well, that has a 1-word answer. Zena, where did you grow up? I'm asking.
Okay. Well, I was born and raised in Montana, Billings, Montana.
Okay. Now, when I read this, here was the next question. In other words, that first question we use a lot. There's nothing wrong with it. But Zena, how did growing up in Billings, Montana, how has that shaped who you are today?
Right. That's a great. And so what you're doing is you're using like maybe something that might be called a cliche question or
Yes.
small talk question, but then
Yeah,
you're using that to open the door to a deeper question that allows for
exactly.
more engagement, more depth of conversation. And so then I
Yeah,
might share something like, well, I think growing up in a small town made me focus on relationships, and there was a lot of faith in my town, and I was surrounded by God's beauty, and all of those things sort of influenced my imagination because I spent a lot of time in the great outdoors or whatever. And then you would use that to be able to keep the conversation going by
yeah,
asking follow-up questions.
exactly, exactly. And the new thought to me was some of those cliche questions that again aren't wrong we start with, but you can then ask the second question that comes across very naturally and is a question that they haven't perhaps thought through or answered. I seek never to ask a gotcha question, a question that would
Right.
cause any embarrassment, but I also seek to ask what I call platinum questions.
Ooh.
Now, I've defined platinum. Somebody else may have a different definition, but just where I'm going with that is that when we're asked a platinum question, it allows us to think and put some things together in our brain that we've never thought about before, but it's kind of fun to do so. And so when I say, Zena, how did growing up in Billings, Montana shape who you are today? If you've never thought through that, it's kind of like, it was kind of fun to think about.
How did
And you
shape?
ended
How
up
did it shape?
actually learning something about yourself. And yet at the same time, it wasn't a question designed to embarrass or put you, make you look dumb or anything like that. Don't ever ask that kind of question.
Right, but it
But
makes you go, how did it shape
yeah,
me? And now I get to discover something along with you, which also prevents it from being rote.
yes, yes,
And all of a sudden, I'm enjoying the conversation more because you're not asking me to repeat just boring small talk what's your major?
yes, yes.
Those types of things. Oh, I like that. That's really good, Bob. That's really good. So, what are some platinum questions? Give me some examples of platinum questions.
Well, Zena, I'll share my favorites. One of my favorite questions is to ask, "Hey, I'd love to hear your story." And the reason I like that question is, I would say some of the rote questions we tend to ask is, "Hey, tell me about your family." Well, if you've got a family and if everything's happy, that's a great question. But if you're in the process of a separation, you have a child who's on drugs, it becomes an awkward question to navigate. And when you don't know somebody, I don't want to ask a question that potentially feels like I'm prying or asking him to reveal tough stuff going on, because that wouldn't be your heart. When I say, "Oh, tell me about your work," well, it's great if you're employed and love what you're doing, but if you were just laid off last week, now I'm asking a question that is going to be a little awkward to answer.
Hmm.
But if I say, "Tell me your story," you can go wherever you want with it. The negative things going on, you don't have to go there.
And I love how
And
you actually said the first time you said, hey, I'd love to hear your story. So
yeah,
that's actually an invitation. It is a question, even though it's a statement. I'd love to hear your story. You're
sure.
implying the question, tell me, tell me your
Yeah,
story. But I like that it's more gentle.
sure. And then here's another platinum question. It's a bit like tell me your story, but I again, this next question not original with me.
Okay.
I'll introduce it in this way. Cheryl Batchelder, who was for many years the CEO of Popeye's Chicken, wrote
Hmm.
a book called Dare to Serve, in which she shared how she used servant leadership, the principles of servant leadership, to turn Popeyes around. When she became the CEO, shares were trading at $10 a share. When she left, they were at $60 a share.
Wow.
And but in this book, she asked this question: how well do you know your staff? Do you know the 3 or 4 events that have most shaped who they are today? Now, Zena, whenever I read or hear a great question, I can hardly wait to find somebody to ask. I had just read that, and 15 minutes later, I was on a coaching call with one of my colleagues in Canada. His name is Neil. Neil and I have been friends since 2007. And I thought I knew Neil's whole story, but I said, Neil, I've just read this great question. I'd love to ask it. He said, Bob, you know I love great questions. What's the question? Neil, what would you say are the 3 to 4 events that most shaped your life? And Neil paused for a second and said, well, Bob, have I ever shared with you that my birth father died when I was 9 months old? I said, no, Neil, you've never shared that with me before. He said, well, Bob, I think I'll share it with you, but that was the first event that marked my life. And I said, well, how so? He said, well, Bob, I have no memory of the man.
Hmm.
He said, my mother remarried, and the man who's really my stepfather is the man who in my heart is my dad, because he's the only dad I've ever, experienced. But he said the story's been shared with me so many times that my birth father knew he was dying. And in the last weeks before he passed, he was in a big bed at home. And every day, I'm told he would ask to hold me. And as he would hold me, he would pray over me and ask that God, the Heavenly Father, would be a father to his little boy that he knew he would not live to raise. Well, as Neil shared that, he began to have tears. His tears, we were on Zoom, his tears caused me to have tears. And Zena, a relationship that was already good in just a few minutes went deeper.
Hmm.
And I must say that of all the times I've asked this question, that was the most emotional response I ever received. But every single
Powerful.
time, it's fascinating to hear as people think. Now, tomorrow they may say, oh, I forgot. Here's another event. This is not a test for perfection, but it's always fascinating. And again, when I speak, I share what I just shared. And then I ask everybody in the audience to stand up, find another person they don't know, and I give them 8 minutes, 4 minutes each to answer that question.
Hmm.
And they're sharing with somebody they don't know the answer to that. And when that 8 minutes is up, get everybody back. I said, would it surprise you if I had another question? Of course, it doesn't surprise them. I say, how many of you here would say you now know more about this person you just had this 8-minute conversation with than some friends that you've known for 20 years?
Hmm.
Every hand goes up. I say,
Wow.
those friends you've known for 20 years, how could you find out what are the 3 to 4 events that most shape their lives? Light bulb, of course, just ask.
Hmm.
But most people have never been asked that question. So again, as they think through what are the events that have shaped my life, it's a platinum question in that they enjoy thinking through that. And when they're done, they think, wow, that was fascinating. I don't think I've ever thought through that before.
That's fantastic. It's interesting because I've taken it upon myself to, whenever I have friends come over, I always ask one of two questions. And this has only been in like the last year. But one of the things I'll ask people is, what would you say the three biggest lessons you've learned in life are?
Hmm.
And the other question that I've been asking is, what do you no longer tolerate in relationships that you used to tolerate? And I find
Those
that
are fantastic.
aren't those good questions? And I
Yes,
and they just
yes.
generate so much discussion because then people think through it and they're like, well, like what are some people will be like, well, what do you mean the three biggest lessons? And I said, well, like the three biggest aha moments you've ever had, things that you've learned that you're like, wow, man, this is really huge and it impacts you going forward. And sometimes people are like, well, what do you mean that I won't tolerate anymore? Well, like, how have you grown so that there's maybe certain things that you were willing to accept before that you realize you can't accept anymore? And what are those? And then it allows for deeper conversation. So it's been an interesting thing. I've really enjoyed that. And I feel like I've only been using that really for, I have this personality where I can't be superficial. Like, I just don't know how to do it. And it's very annoying to some people because it can
Oh,
often feel intrusive. So I have to learn to, how do I do this in a way that doesn't feel intrusive, that feels relational and inviting and
yeah.
exciting to engage in those conversations?
Well, Zena, you've just added to my collection of platinum
Oh,
questions.
good. That's great.
Here's another group of questions that I find fascinating. And so, again, one of the things I love about leading with questions is so many of the best questions are so simple. And there's a story, true story. Navy Captain Michael D. Abershoff, when he took over the command of the USS Benfold, one of our nation's most modern warships. I don't know how the Navy measures morale on a ship, but morale on that ship was the lowest of all ships in the US Navy. I think we have some 300 vessels. 18 months later, under his command, morale retested was the highest of all ships in the US Navy. He
Wow.
literally took morale from worst to first.
Wow, that's
So how
impressive.
did he do that?
I bet he
Well,
asked questions.
well, the first thing he did, he got on that ship and he scheduled 300 15-minute meetings with 300 sailors on that ship. And he asked them three questions. And, at the end of the first day, he might have only had 10 or 15 of these 15-minute meetings, but there was a buzz on the ship. The new captain's different. But the three questions he asked, Zena, you'll have these memorized upon just hearing them one time. They're so simple. He asked the sailors, what do you like best about this ship? Second question, what do you like least? Third, what would you change if you could? Now, he didn't promise to make every change that every sailor suggested, but he asked each sailor those three questions. What do you like best? What do you like least? What would you change if you could? Now, it doesn't take long. And as captain, he's hearing things and thinking, what? What do you mean that's not being done on this ship? We're going to fix that.
Hmm.
Zena,
So you're saying this guy was able to take the lowest morale and turn it around by asking just these three questions?
Zena, that was the start. That was the start.
That's incredible.
Next step, though, as he began to hear things, like I say, he didn't promise to make every changes, but there was a lot of things he thought we're going to change that. Now, this won't surprise you, but I'll ask you. When he called all the sailors together and announced the change, guess who he gave credit to for the idea?
Don't know.
The sailor who had suggested it.
He actually gave credit where credit was due.
Yeah. Even if it was like, well, of course we're going to fix that. We have fixed that on all my ships before. We're not going to tolerate that. But instead of saying, okay, I, the captain, will make this change, he named a sailor. Hey, thank you. We're going to implement your idea.
Well, and what
Yes,
that does then is it gets people excited to share their ideas.
yeah. That sailor, let's say he was a short sailor. At that moment, he felt 10 feet tall.
That's right. That's awesome.
And that created the spirit of his command of asking, implementing, but giving credit for who the idea, even if it was like, of course, I've done that before, but rather than claiming it his decision, he understood it'll increase morale if I give credit to the sailor who suggested that idea
Well, it's
and all the other
interesting.
benefits.
Right. It's interesting you talk about that because here you have the Great Leaders Ask Questions book that you sent me. And I read through this and I actually took notes. Like you have a bunch of questions in here. And this is one of the free ebooks that you're offering for people. They can
Yes.
download it at the link below. But this was so valuable. Like just it gives you an idea of what questions to ask so that you can help sort of keep the conversation going and actually but for not just to keep the conversation going for conversation's sake, but so that you can solve problems, so that you can
Yeah.
get to the root of the problem and inspire the people. That's part of what the goal here is. It's to inspire people to join you in solving these problems, right?
Oh, yeah. Zena, I got the book right here. And, it's a Fortune 100 list of questions, great questions. And in one section, in your book, page 5, but would you like to know the 4 questions one consultant uses to make a handsome 6-figure income? And this consultant, he did happen to be a man, but he shared with me that Bob, I only really asked 4 questions, and I make this handsome 6-figure income. And he said, I'm not a subject matter expert. They don't bring me in because I have expertise in a certain area. He said on day 1, I could consult with the CEO of an airline company. Day 2, the head of a pharmaceutical company. Day 3, the head of a computer or software company. He said, I'd use the same 4 questions. He said, Bob, might you be curious to know what the 4 questions are? I said, yes. In fact, can I write them down? He said, I'd be disappointed if you didn't. I pulled out a pen and he said, here you go. What's going well is number 1. Number 2, what's not? Number 3, where are you stuck? Number 4, what needs to change? And then, Zena, he said, now, Bob, don't miss question 1. He said, when I'm consulting with a brand new client, if I started with question 2, what's not going well? In other words, it's 8 in the morning, we're just starting. Zena, tell me what's not going well. He said, I would not get an honest answer. He said, no one at 8 a.m. wants to kind of get naked and confess, yeah, we're a bunch of losers here. He said, you're not going to get the truth. So he said, I never start there. I start with, Zena, tell me what's going well. Now he has a whole bunch of what else's and how'd you figure that out? And wow, that's brilliant. He said, by the time we're done with question 1, they're thinking that I'm thinking they're one of the most brilliant leaders I've ever spent time with. He said, now that sets the stage for question 2. What's not going well? He said, now I get the truthful answer because they're not feeling like they're confessing, yeah, we're a bunch of losers. It's kind of like, hey, in spite of all the victories, home runs, all the good things, yeah, we do have a few issues. And they
And
actually
now
share them.
they're not just trying to be self-protective
Right.
because they
Right.
know their value, that you see all the good stuff they're doing. So it's safe now to share all the problems.
Exactly. And
Hmm.
then he said, Bob, note question 3 and 4. Who actually solves their problem for them? I said, I guess they do. He said, it's really interesting. Exactly, they do. And at the end of the day, they call me a brilliant consultant and write me that big check and thank me for my time. And I've always shared that these 4 questions, though, will work anywhere. Let's just say that you're invited to be a new board member. It's your first meeting. And at some point they say, well, Zena, you have any questions? You say, well, gosh, I'm honored to be here, but I have a couple of questions that would just help me kind of have context of where we're going. But what would you all say in this organization or whatever that committee is, what's been going well? And you let them share that, wow, hey, that's great. And you can applaud, the rest of the team who's been there, the board members who've been there longer. Wow, that's been, how'd you all figure that out? That was so wise.
Hmm.
Leading to question 2, what's not going well?
Hmm.
And again, you're going to hear, and wow, where do you think we're stuck there? What needs to change? And with those 4 questions, I can almost guarantee that at the end of that meeting, now they may not verbalize it, but I won't be surprised if they do. If they would say, "Oh, Zena, we're so glad you're on the board."
Right.
But even if it's not verbalized, they're walking away thinking, "Wow, that was a good choice that we invited Zena to the board. Her questions were really helpful today."
And
And
all
what a
those
great,
questions do is allow for vision to come out, allow
yes.
for clarity to come out. That's interesting. I'm wondering even if writers could ask that about their own work, or they could
Oh,
ask it about their own project, or whatever the case may be.
yes,
Mhm.
yes, yes.
That's
Those are
amazing.
some,
Yeah, I was going to say one thing I was going to say real quick, and we'll close down here in a second, but you are a Christian, as am I. And one of the things that you talk about here, one of your books is like 339 questions that Jesus asked, and there's some really fun things. 260 questions that Paul, the apostle of Christ, asked. I mean, these are really interesting little tidbits.
Zena, since I sent you that set of books, we released a new book. We've updated 339 questions to 340.
Wow.
But we also added 12 chapters from contributors around the world giving input to help us understand even better the questions Jesus asked. Now, people have said, "Bob, where'd you come up with the 340th question?" Well, somebody reading the book you have sent me an email and said, "Why haven't you included the question Jesus asked Paul in the book of Acts? Why are you persecuting me?" And I said, "Because I never thought about looking at the book of Acts." So that's the 340th question. But, one of the things that is illustrated in here is Jesus obviously wanted to see people changed. But something he obviously instinctively knew is that if he wanted to see somebody changed, asking them a question that allowed them to come up with the answer to his question had a greater probability of changing them than if he said, "Let me tell you." And, as I share, even in secular audiences, wouldn't we all do well to learn from the communication practices of the person I believe to be the greatest leader ever? But even if you just want to say one of the greatest leaders, I always say, after all, he did start a movement 2,000 years ago that's still signing up recruits today.
Right.
But his communications with stories and questions. And so often today, we find Christians preaching and telling, where he shared stories and asked questions.
Amen.
And I really believe in asking questions, his questions showed respect, built relationship, created a conversation. But as they answered, their answers caused this much greater likelihood that they would embrace their answer, because it was like, "This is what I thought." In other words, their answer they owned because it was their answer, and yet his question had prompted them to think about something in a way they'd never thought about it before.
I love that. And here's something I'll just add to that. I think there are a lot of Christians out there who don't trust other people. And so they feel like they have to spoon feed them in their work. They have to have a message driven thing. They can't just leave open ended questions because they might not find the truth. But that shows a profound distrust of other people. It shows a profound elitist attitude, an us versus them, a one-up situation. I'm smarter, I know the answer, I have to lead them, rather than seeing the value and actually believing that there is inherent worth in the human being, and that asking questions is a legitimate way for them to come up with the answers, that the Holy Spirit can do the work. And so
Yeah.
a lot of times in the work of Christians, that's what's missing. It's because of this fear of asking questions, of leaving things open-ended and letting the person grapple with it. They think they have to spoon feed and close the chapter and have it be a done deal, rather than trusting that the question process is what opens us up to seeking truth. So I love that.
There had to be a reason that he asked 340 questions. That's how many recorded. As I share about this book, it's compiled by Bob.
Right.
It was written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They're the ones who recorded the questions Jesus asked. And in the NIV, when you add them all up, they're 340. But this, again, is a free ebook. If you go to leadingwithquestions.com, at the top, you'll see the word books. If you click on that, you'll have access to this and all of the rest of the free ebooks.
That's
and
great.
Delighted to have people take advantage of that.
Bob, thank you so much for being on the show today, for talking about these wonderful leading with questions. I find it fascinating. I've loved the stuff that you sent me. Thank you for your generosity in sharing with this audience and with me personally this idea. It's just wonderful, just wonderful.
Well, Zena, you are a great host. You've asked great questions, and I've enjoyed this thoroughly. It's been an honor to be your guest today.
Thank you, Bob. All right, so for the audience out there, just go ahead and click on the link below. You're going to find links to Bob's Leading with Questions website, which will lead you to the free downloads. Take advantage of that. What a generous offer. And we're just really grateful for someone like Bob who's willing to share his lifetime of expertise with this audience. Thanks for being here. Thank you for listening to The Storyteller's Mission with Zena Del Lowe. May you go forth inspired to change the world for the better through story.